Tommy the Hammer here, hanging out with my good buddy, the dreaded Dean, and today we're going to be discussing one of our absolute favorite video game series, Resident Evil.
Look, Don, it's the Umbrella Corporation. Anyway, so Resident Evil is a very prolific franchise of my youth and my adulthood. Like, I believe the first time I ever played the game was my buddy Dale's 13th birthday party, where he rented a PlayStation 1, and we rented Resident Evil 1, and I thought the live motion action was like the best thing on earth. I'm like, oh my god, like video games have come along so far, like I'm watching a movie right now.
It's pretty revolutionary.
Albeit it was a very corny movie.
Yeah.
But as a kid, I didn't realize that. I thought Resident Evil 1 was the best thing ever.
Yeah, I mean, to be perfectly honest, one of my favorite memories of it was really late at night. A friend of mine, he rented also a PlayStation, because back in the day, if you wanted to play these new games, you either bought the system, which was a couple $100s, much like it is today, and then the other option was you rented it. And a lot of people would go to video stores and they would rent these new systems and they would get the hottest game. And for me, we did a kind of a horror double feature on the PS1 at the time. We got the game D, and then the other game that we rented was Resident Evil. And I remember playing the game for the first time, we were just captivated by the horror. It was live action and it's corny as hell, but there was something dark and sinister about it. And when you were playing the game back in the mid-90s, you just didn't know what to expect. And that one initial scene where the dogs just jumped through the windows in the hallway, we all shrieked. I mean, it was like watching a horror movie suddenly. And now we're going to be covering pretty much all the main staples in the series. We're going to be covering everything that's canon, and then later on we'll talk a little bit about kind of the side games and all little side stories that are pretty interesting too. But right now we're just going to give a rapid-fire impression of the series, and right now we're going to start with Resident Evil 1. So Dean, go ahead and say what's good and what's bad about it.
Well, it started off a revolution of survival horror games, and there's nothing like it. I had so much fun with it. Bad things were, the controls, and again, it was pretty much the first of its kind, so you didn't know what the fuck you were doing. That was before the internet. Like, it was a tough game when it first came out.
That was difficult as fuck, dude.
Tough.
Well, for me, what I like about the game is pretty much what you said. It's what it started. And Resident Evil, I mean, there would be Silent Hill wouldn't exist if it wasn't for Resident Evil. And all the other horror games that kind of came out that people like, that people play today, like the Dying Light series and whatnot, they all wouldn't, know where to begin if it wasn't for Resident Evil, And so, like, coming from that perspective and, like, experiencing it firsthand, like, that kind of, like, it changes the mysticism of the game for me. So, like, what I like about it is what it has done to, the landscape of video games. Gameplay-wise, I always had problems with it from a dynamic point of view, and mainly because growing up with horror movies, I always wanted to live these horror movies, and Resident Evil kind of gave that to you to a limited extent. What I don't like about the game is, in my opinion, it's a pre-rendered, glorified click and point with a 3D sprite moving around the painted image of the screen. And if that bothers you, if you don't like point-and-click video games and things like that, then you'll have a problem with this game.
Hey, what's going on?
Jill? Is that you, Jill? What happened?
Barry, help me, please. The door won't open. Quick!
Stay away from the door, Jill. I'm gonna kick this door down. Hurry! This way! That was too close. You were almost a Jill sandwich.
You're right. Barry, thanks for saving my life.
But that's my biggest gripe with it, was just the cumbersome controls that I eventually got used to. The cryptic nature of the game really turned people off, and it turned me off. But overall, I mean, everything about the game is fantastic. I mean, the story's great, the monsters are great, the mythology of the game is great, but that's pretty much my only complaint. And now we're going to cover Resident Evil Part 2, and Dean, what are your positives and negatives to say about Resident Evil 2?
I mean, there's not much negative about it, although it's kind of weird how I took in the series. Like, I had one. Well, I had the director's cut of 1, which came with the demo of Part 2, and I played as much as I could from the demo. But like, that part where you first see a licker like crawl across the ceiling, like, scared the shit out of me when I was a kid.
It's a great scene.
But for some reason, like, I'm not sure why I skipped over 3. But I had Code Veronica for Dreamcast, but after that, like, I kind of fell off from the series, to be honest. But, so I didn't actually complete, well, I guess I never completed Resident Evil 2, but I hadn't beaten Resident Evil 2 until about a year ago. And,
it's a tough game.
like, it still holds up now. Like, I love that game. Like, I beat it on Leon's campaign, and I beat it on Claire's campaign. Didn't look at the internet at all for the game.
For me personally, I mean, like, if you were to judge the Resident Evil series based upon the first 2 games, I mean, Part 2 really is kind of like the ceiling, in a way. Like, you took what worked in Part 1, tweaked it, refined it, and made it on a grander scale. I mean, everything about it is terrifying as much as the first one is. I mean, you've got the crows in the in the bus sequence, and then you've got Mr. X that's pursuing you.
I find the scariest part in the entire game is when you see Mr. X coming at you, like, down the hall, only on the monitor. Like, there was just something, like, so chilling about, like, seeing him on the monitor before he got there. Like, he's come to fucking kill my ass.
My negatives are the same negatives as Part 1's, If you don't dig pre-rendered backgrounds, it's still a glorified point-and-click game. If you don't like the sluggish controls, it's got those, with very little innovations. But, like, if you were willing to work with it, the game turned out to be very magnificent. And, like, Leon is, like, one of the finest characters out of the whole series. I mean, I don't even really... I mean, I like the other characters, but for the most part, Leon's it for me.
What a mess! What could have done this? What was that? What are these things? All right, that's far enough. Don't move! Don't move. No! What's up with that guy? That was a clean hit.
Wait! Don't shoot!
Get down! We can't stay out here. Head to the police station. It'll be a lot safer.
So, like, now we're going to talk about Resident Evil 3 Nemesis, and I'm really curious to hear how Dean feels about this game. So, positives and negatives, please.
Well, again, I don't know if there are a lot of negatives. Like, again, a really good game. I actually immediately started playing Resident Evil 3 after I beat Resident Evil 2, the middle of last year sometime. And I think it's kind of weird at the very beginning you get the choice of doing easy or hard mode, and of course I'm going to pick hard mode. So I played on hard mode first time I ever played the game, and so like it's kind of a rough start. Like I restarted the game a lot. Like that's probably one of the negatives where like there was kind of a learning curve for me, because it basically is Resident Evil 2, but Jill is now in the city, and I think that's awesome that you finally get to explore a city. The designer of the city must be a madman, though.
Yeah, with all the puzzles and cryptic nonsense. Well, in terms of Nemesis, like this was like the first Resident Evil I ever completed on my own, and at this point the internet had developed a lot more, so I was able to look for hints and walkthroughs online a little bit more than like say on part 1 and part 2. But outside of that, I did it on my own from beginning to end, and there was a sense of accomplishment to that. So like Nemesis holds a special place in my heart, but it also feels like filler, and that's my biggest gripe with the game is like it's a single disc release of what in my opinion should have been a combination of Resident Evil 2.
This is Chopper Delta, preparing to drop off at area E95070.
What are they?
Waiting orders. Over. All units proceed to Richmond and Victoria. All right.
Let's do it. Let's move. Go, 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 go. Fire! Come and get it. Son of a... Don't give up. Don't help her. Where are they?
So now we're going to talk about Code Veronica. A lot of people know it as Code Veronica X, but when it initially came out on the Sega Dreamcast, it was only known as Code Veronica, and I can only assume that Code Veronica X is kind of like a director's cut version of the game. So we're going to be pretty much talking about the positives and negatives, and for me with that game, one of the more positive aspects was the more cinematic approach that the creators of the game took with it. No longer did it feel like it was stuck within the parameters of the old game's setbacks, but rather this time around everything was pre-rendered in polygon graphics, and it just gave it a more cinematic approach, and that was one of the my favorite aspects of Code Veronica X was that it felt like a genuine step in a completely different direction, and it pushed the story along in new and different ways. So like for me, it was a giant stride from Resident Evil 1, 2, and Nemesis. But the negatives I would have to say about the game were the same old problems that I had with the prior Resident Evil games, and that's mainly the slow, cumbersome controls, and polygon or not, it's still pre-rendered background, so you're not fully there yet in terms of a 3D game that's immersing you in this world. But outside of that, Code Veronica X is like one of my favorites out of the series. It's an oddball. Not everyone likes it. There's some what people would consider missteps in it, but overall, I think it's a solid game.
I had it originally for the Dreamcast, actually, and I think I was like 16 or 17 when I had it, and this was before anyone really had the internet, and it was really difficult for me. Like, I didn't get very far. Like, I thought it looked great, and it was a cool game, and I wanted to get into it, but, like, I just didn't make it anywhere. fast forward to about now, like, I kind of obsessively downloaded every Resident Evil I possibly could on my PS3, Code Veronica being one of them, and it's definitely still hard. I've gotten a little farther than when I was a kid, but I still haven't gotten very far in the game. So if I have any complaints, it's like, God damn, is this one cryptic?
But now we're going to move on to the most prolific Resident Evil, the one that probably most current generationers in the series can relate to.
Revolutionized the series.
It really did. None other than Resident Evil 4. And when this game first came out, the GameCube kind of first came out. And so that system was kind of new to the scene. And it was no secret that the GameCube had better graphics than, say, you know, an Xbox product or a Sony product at the time. So when I heard...
How times have changed.
Yeah, definitely. But when I heard there was a new Resident Evil game coming out for the GameCube, I was ecstatic, especially since, from what I saw with the previews of the game, it looked fully rendered, and boy, was it ever. The positives for Resident Evil 4, I would have to say, are just about everything. The graphics, the voice acting, the story, the gore, the sense of dread, the immersed world that that game presented to you was fantastic. And to this day, I find very few games can match it, even though a lot of games borrowed from it. And there's probably a multitude of games that younger generations play today that they don't even realize were started with Resident Evil 4. But my negatives with the game is mainly that it's not consistent. I feel like the first half of the game is magnificent in the horror sense. I feel like the beginning of the Las Plagas cult aspect on the mid-chapters was intriguing at first, and then it kind of like lost its way about halfway through, and then regains it again for a strong finish with the military island. So if I had to bitch about the game, I'd just say that it's not perfect, but hey, few games are 100% perfect, and especially in the Resident Evil series, I'm going to have to say, you know, Resident Evil 4 is definitely one of my favorites.
Now, for me, this one totally went over my head when it first came out, and I'm actually kind of pissed about that, because I think when it first came out, I would have fucking died for it, and like it even started the whole New Game Plus aspect, and like I'm a little on the OCD side, and I would have loved just like, you know, buffing out all the weapons until you couldn't anymore. Like, I love completing a game. I don't like it as much nowadays because to complete a game, it's like you literally have to spend more time than a full-time fucking job.
Yeah,
so it's like I gave up on completing a lot of games. But when that came out, that would have been one that I probably would have completed. But so, you know, I've gotten kind of into a Resident Evil phase the last couple of years. I had downloaded 4 on my PS4, and I started playing, like, pretty much right after I beat Resident Evil 3. And I guess the game was very divisive when it first came out, because a lot of the, you know, old school Resident Evil fans are like, it's a totally different game. It's an action game. Like, we want the old style survival horror.
You better stay outside. Ashley, go hide.
Yeah.
Hasta luego.
Okay, guys, so now we're going to move on to Resident Evil 5, and right off the bat, I'm going to say that this game didn't grab me by the cojones like 4 did, and I was still stuck on a 4 kick when 5 came out. I felt like 5 came out a little too fast, in my opinion, and so at the time when I was still playing 4, 5 was released, and people were like, oh, you gotta check this out. So when I initially sat down and played it, I wasn't wowed. And another thing that kind of like, knocked me off kilt was the fact that the lead was Chris, and I like Leon. Leon was fantastic in 4. And as a matter of fact, 4 solidified my love for his character. 4 is a perfect embodiment of Leon. And to go into 5 and not have any explanation for what happened to Leon, at least up until that point, it was kind of like a smack in the face, So, like, I had a problem with that. But then years later, I gave the game another chance, especially with the Gold Edition, and I found out that it's actually a really great game with some fine keystone elements in the Resident Evil series embodied in that game. So the positives, I'd have to say, is the story is fantastic, the graphics are fantastic, the voice acting just as good as Part 4, and the monsters and tyrants are just as terrifying as they are in the previous games. So honestly, I don't know why I was so apprehensive with it, but my negatives with it are pretty much what I was saying before. I'm not crazy about Chris. Some of the change-ups were a little too experimental from Part 4 to 5, but some of them are very much needed, like the pretty much active time battle.
The time events.
Yeah, like all of those things I felt are necessary to make the game flow for a newer generation. But outside of that, it's, in my opinion, it's a lesser entry, but not by far. So,
for me, I was on like a Resident Evil marathon. Like right after I beat 4, I was gonna jump right into 5. So I start playing 5, and the controls are completely different. Well, not completely different. They just felt really awkward to me. Maybe I was just burnt out on Resident Evil at that time, but like I felt like the first level of Resident Evil 5 was just fucking brutal. It's like this is supposed to be the level that introduces you to the game, and it's just busting your fucking balls right off the bat. And
yeah, it does.
I was actually very off-put at first, and I didn't even play it. So like I forget what I started playing after that, but like I don't know. I kind of have video game like ADD, so to speak, where like I'll start playing a game and then stop and play another game and stop, and it's bad. But at any rate, I finally started playing the original Revelations, and after I beat that, I'm like, well, the story progresses naturally from Revelations 1 through 5, so I'm like, I'll play 5 right after that. I'll finally finish it. And once I got myself through the first level, like, the gameplay was still, like, different enough where I'm like, I don't know about this, because, like, I feel like they were trying to mimic a lot of the other shooters coming out at the time.
A little bit, yeah.
Well, once I got used to the gameplay and got used to, like, having the AI partner or whatever, and really started getting into the meat of the game and into the meat of the story, like Tom said, like, that's one of the highlights of the game.
You don't know what you're talking about! You can all go to hell!
Wait a minute. That's the...
equipo. For what? Now to Zuia. Hapo ndani. Wawe. Wacha wawe toleo ya damu ya njia zetu. Wawe!
All right, now we're going to move on to Resident Evil 6, and this game seems to be the most polarizing for old school fans and for new school fans, shockingly enough. When Resident Evil 6 first came out, I was still kind of stuck in a I don't like Resident Evil 5 mode. So I kind of blew that one off too. You know, I was still stuck on 4. I didn't give it a chance. Eventually I bought a PS3 and gave it the second chance that it so honestly deserved. And what I discovered with Resident Evil 6 is that it's not as bad as a lot of people will have you believe. Admittedly, it takes missteps, but a lot of the games in the series take missteps. The problem with Resident Evil 6 is it gets off on a bad foot, and when you initially kick up the game, there's a lot of chaos going on. You don't know what the fuck's going on, and there's enough changes to the core dynamics of the game to make you think that what you're playing isn't very good. But what I eventually discovered with Resident Evil 6 is that for all of its changes that it makes, once you get past that beginning sequence, everything else about the game is amazing. And one of my absolute favorites of Resident Evil 6 is the diverse nature of the game. Not one level or chapter itself plays like a previous one. And right when you think you've got this game pegged, it's going to throw something at you that you weren't expecting. A lot of people get used to the idea, especially in Resident Evil 4 and 5, that once you've leveled your character up to the point of where they're like a god with the shotgun, nothing can stand in your way. Well, this game will throw you for a loop. There are levels that have nothing to do with high-powered weaponry whatsoever, and you got to rely on stealth, or you got to rely on just pure, cunning, action nature to get you through a level. And that's what I liked about the game the most is the diverse nature of it. It feels like you're playing an arcade game that's been made, for home consoles. I like the variety, I like the story, and the graphics are beautiful in Resident Evil 6. It's like, when you're looking at it, the detail on some of the characters is just gritty and like bloody, and it's fantastic. My gripes with it, are very few and far in between, but I do recognize why other people dislike it. All right, Dean, so what are your thoughts on Resident Evil 6?
Well, my first reaction wasn't so great. I had downloaded it on the PlayStation Network, and I played it late at night, and I had just beat Grand Theft Auto 5, which, for the record, I feel like is one of the finest games of this current generation of video games. That being said, when I first started Resident Evil 6, when I got in the car, I really wanted to drive the car like I was playing Grand Theft Auto 5. When I got in the helicopter, same thing. I felt like the timed action portions were like, I don't know, took some fun out of the game, but like I realized like what I was expecting out of it is, like, that's not what Resident Evil is. Like, you're not going to drive around in a car in Resident Evil. Of course it's going to be a timed event. So my initial response for it, like, it was unfair. I've recently started playing it a little bit. I'm still in the first chapter for Leon. But I would randomly start playing it after I got tired of dying in Resident Evil 0. Anyway, so my main issue about Resident Evil 6 so far is the camera angle. Like, I feel like they almost gave you too much control over the camera. So, like, my camera is kind of all over the place right now. So I definitely need to get used to the game, but it looks fucking beautiful, and there are zombies, and I mean, it's a natural evolution after 5, so I'm really looking forward to playing it.
It's heading for the city!
This is FOS. Is anyone there?
FOS?
Chris Redfield with the BSAA here.
Hold on. I'm patching you through to Agent Leon Kennedy.
What? Leon! Leon, where are you?
Chris, we're just outside of Tachi. Why?
Get the hell out of there!
Cooler things that I've collected over the years happens to be Resident Evil novels, and the best part about these books is that they follow the game's canon, and there was even a few titles that they inserted in between games as they were being released to kind of tide fans over. So if you loved the story, it pretty much gave you more of what you wanted, more dialogue, more characters. Some of the more prolific moments in the video games were written out in better detail, so you can really kind of sink your teeth into some of these details if you're that much of a Resident Evil nerd. And to be perfectly honest, I love these books. If this is something that seems like it would interest you, I do believe these are out of print now, so you have to probably go on Amazon or any other kind of like website where you're buying it in the marketplace, but highly recommended, guys.
Anyway, the last thing I want to go over is my 2 favorite Resident Evil games. Like, after playing, the entire series the last couple of years, for the most part, I haven't finished 0, Code Veronica, or 6 yet, but I've played through all of them quite a bit, and probably my favorite is the remake of the original Resident Evil that has come out on the PS3 and PS4 and the other, like the Xbox systems or whatever, and PC, I believe. Like, it just looks beautiful, and one of the worst things about the original is it just looks so clunky and outdated. Like, they really, really made it look beautiful, and it's got some of the best monsters still of the entire series. Like, something about the fucking zombie sharks just terrified me. Like, I have kind of a primal fear of what's in the depths of waters anyway. Like, I have crazy underwater nightmares, and like a fucking huge ass zombie shark, that's fucking nightmare fuel. Like, I'm sitting here like drinking beers in the dark, and a fucking zombie shark eats me, and like I just feel it in my soul, but like, I love the original Resident Evil, the remake. It's so good. The other one that is a close second it's one that is so hated. It's so hated, but I love it so much. Operation Raccoon City. And I know a lot of people hated it, and I can understand if you buy a brand new game for $60 and you get 7 campaign levels, and I'm not really much of an online gamer anyway. Like I said, I'm more of a retro gamer. There were a lot of complaints about like the online mode. Personally, like, I bought the game for $5.99 on a sale, and I played the 7 campaign mode levels. Like, Tom actually helped me out. Like, I actually knew nothing about the run button. You have to like hold the hold the left stick in to run, and I didn't know that. That like opened the game up for me.
A lot of the later Resident Evils imply that tactic too. So you know.
But anyway, like even though it's 7 levels, like there is 7 more levels that you can download. But like I feel like the controls are just so tight. I really like the RPG aspect where you kind of level up your character and get new abilities. If you can find it for sale on PlayStation Network or Xbox Live, like pick it up. It's usually like $6, and the DLC is pretty cheap. Like I love the game. Like I still go back to it.
But that's pretty much what we have to say on the subject. If you guys agree or disagree, why don't you go ahead and comment in the fields below. And we just also want to say Happy Halloween, and we hope you've been enjoying all of these horror-themed videos that we've been posting in the month of October. Also, I want to say stick around, because in the next couple of days, you're going to be checking out our video for Kent, Ohio's Halloween Fest.
Whoa!
There's going to be shenanigans aplenty for sure. So, folks, stick around.
Shenanigan. Happy Halloween from Dean.